Kyle Busch and Martin Truex Jr. might be about to combine sweep all 10 races in the playoffs. How's it going, everybody? Hope you're doing well. My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove. I've been thinking, since I've started doing the show the last few weeks in my new apartment here, the background, really, this doesn't look like a NASCAR show. I really don't have any racing things in the background. So today I figured I'd wear one of my few racing shirts to kind of help remind people that this is in fact a racing show. Because sometimes I forget myself. But we definitely have an awful lot of racing to talk about today. Charlotte, the first race of round 2 of the playoffs, was this past Sunday. A day race for a change. I feel like this race has typically been a night race in years past. Now, while the time of day might have changed, the end result was pretty familiar to race fans lately. Although he didn't qualify very well and didn't seem to have that great of a car early on, Martin Truex Jr. won again. That's 6 wins this season for Martin Truex Jr., 2 already in these playoffs. He is definitely locked into round 3, so MTJ not gonna have to worry about Talladega, unlike pretty much everybody else. The race at Charlotte, at least early on, we saw some different leaders up front, guys that we have not seen lead races as much as we've seen guys like Truex lead races recently. Kevin Harvick led a lot of laps, won the first 2 stages, I believe. Kevin Harvick ultimately finished 3rd in the race. Chase Elliott continued his strong playoff run so far with a 2nd place finish. Denny Hamlin finished 4th, which was good for him, and very impressive to me was Jamie McMurray. Ran top 5 almost all day and finished 5th. So for a guy that came into the playoffs or this round with almost no bonus points, he needed a strong run today, and boy, that's exactly what they did. Jimmie Johnson was 7th, so still, he's just consistently running 5th to 10th, right around there. Just every race these playoffs, that's kind of how it's felt for Jimmy. I don't know if that's going to be enough to get out of this round. I think really his result at Talladega is going to ultimately determine whether he makes it through or not. And that's not really a position you want to be in. You really don't want to have to rely on Talladega to get a lot of points. Ryan Blaney finished 8th, which I would say is a very good finish for that team. They've been relatively inconsistent, or at least they have not been consistently, top 5 speed in a while now, so an 8th place run at a 1.5 mile racetrack, which dominates these playoff races, that's a decent run for them. Kyle Larson finished 10th, but he had a good car for most of the race, a better car than that for almost the entire race, but on a late race restart, Kurt Busch got really loose underneath Kyle Larson. 2 of them made contact. Busch ultimately spun out. Larson had some damage on his car that messed him up on the absolute last restart. That's why he fell back to 10th. Still an okay performance. They have a lot of bonus points, but he's not quite as well off as he could have been, I suppose. Matt Kenseth finished 11th in kind of a confusing day. He ran top 5, I think finished top 3 in one of the stages. Got some good stage points, but then midway late through the race, they made a bad adjustment, fell back to outside the top 10, and that's basically where they ran the rest of the race. So 11th for Kenseth. Like McMurray, he came into this round with very few bonus points, and McMurray, while he came up and got a top 5 and really made a great points day out of it, relatively speaking, Kenseth's 11th place finish is not quite as good as they needed, or that's not quite what they need, to be honest. They need something a little bit more than that, but still 2 races to go. We'll see how the 20 team can rebound. And speaking of rebounds, a couple other teams that did not have great finishes at Charlotte: Ricky Stenhouse Jr. 13th and Brad Keselowski 15th. Now on the surface, a 13th place finish for Ricky Stenhouse actually sounds pretty decent, but he wasn't able to take advantage of stage points, and his 10 bonus points for his 2 wins this year will only help him out so much. So 13th for Stenhouse, when I've already listed a bunch of other playoff drivers up in the top 10, 11. 13th is not quite going to cut it. He's not out of it yet. He's still right there near the bubble, but man, he's going to have to really have a great day at Talladega and an inhuman day at Kansas if I think they're going to move on to the round of 8. And then Brad Keselowski finished 15th. Penske's just not what they used to be at the beginning of the season or in the last couple of years. Penske is just slow. It started, Logano was most notable. He didn't even make the playoffs, but Keselowski, he's seeing the effects too. That team's not what they used to be. I picked Keselowski to make it through this round, but with a 15th place finish and not a whole lot of bonus points, Keselowski's currently on the outside looking in. I'll talk about points more in a second, but yeah, 2-car is going to need a good day at Talladega. We've seen him have clutch performances at Talladega in the past, so it's not impossible, but like I said about Jimmy earlier, you never want to have to rely on Talladega to get your points. And the only playoff driver who really had a lot of struggles on Sunday was Kyle Busch. I know, right? Kyle Busch, the guy who won 2 out of the first 3 races of the playoffs, the dude who's been the best of JGR all season long. Yeah, they had troubles. It started during kind of the middle of the portion of the race when Kyle Busch got loose, hit the outside wall, caused some pretty serious damage to that car. They came into pit road several times, were able to repair it. To some extent, they were honestly barely able to make minimum speed. They were just out there trying to log laps to not lose any more laps and lose any more potential positions. But ultimately they ended up bringing out several other cautions as the day went on. That car just was not capable of running well at all. So 29th for Kyle Busch in this first race. Now Kyle Busch has won a bunch of races this season. He won 2 races last round. He's got plenty of bonus points. Not as much as Truex, but he's got a lot of bonus points. So he's still in the top 8 right now and still has an okay cushion, but with this bad finish at Charlotte, really, a bad finish at either Talladega or Kansas could possibly be the end of their playoff hopes. And that would definitely be a major upset, a major development. Because I don't know about you guys, but I know most people have Kyle Busch make it to their Final Four. A lot of people have Kyle Busch as a realistic possibility to win the championship. We've talked about all season long, and it's basically been Truex, Kyle Busch, and Kyle Larson have been the three guys to really watch out for consistently. So yeah, it would be a big story if Kyle Busch were to get eliminated this early. But anyway, time will tell. Before I move on to looking at the playoff grid and analyzing everyone's positions from there, let's talk a little bit about a couple of minor news stories that came out this week. One pretty notable story was that Landon Cassill, who's been driving the 34 car for Front Row Motorsports this season, will be out of that car for next season. Now, Front Row Motorsports has not named a driver to take that spot. That car has been driven by a few different drivers over the last several years. Landon Cassill's just the most recent, but currently it leaves Cassill without a ride for next season. Now, Landon Cassill's been one of those drivers. He's driven for a bunch of teams over the last several years. He's run a lot of Cup races now in his career, a lot of Xfinity races as well. He's done a lot of NASCAR National Series racing last several years, but he's really been having to work his way up with kind of start and park teams, then to a little bit better teams. Honestly, Front Row Motorsports might be the best team he's driven for so far. And obviously they have never been in contention to really win any races or to make the playoffs, but let's face it guys, the Front Row Motorsports has never really been that kind of team, so I can't fault the driver too bad for that. It'll be interesting to see where Landon Cassill ends up, because we've seen so many young drivers taking over these, what few good rides are still available. There may not be an opening for him. I think Landon Cassill, good chance maybe he gets a good car in the Xfinity Series and is able to actually be competitive and show us that he knows how to drive, because that is the only thing when he keeps driving for these lousy teams. I just feel like, as with any of these guys who've been driving for lousy teams, you just can't really see how good of drivers they really are until they're with a pretty decent team and have decent equipment. So we'll see where Landon Cassill ends up. No announcements have been made by anybody in that situation, so don't know everything's up in the air still, but could the 34 car go to one of these big name drivers who are currently without a ride? Could Danica end up in the 34 car? Could Kurt Busch, by a crazy turn of events, end up in the 34? Could Matt Kenseth decide to go or get an opportunity to race in the 34 car? A lot of mystery. Continuing the trend of silly season and ride availability, Furniture Row Racing, who houses currently Martin Truex Jr. and Eric Jones, announced that they currently do not plan to run the 77 car in 2018. It's been well documented that Eric Jones, who's a rookie driving that car this year, will be going over to the 20 to drive that for Joe Gibbs Racing. The 77 was a new car this year. Up until this point, Furniture Row Racing had just been housing the 78 car. There were rumors a few weeks back that because the 77 has obviously shown speed at a few different tracks here, Jones has been close to getting a win here and there. There were rumors that maybe a big name driver, at the time I guess a lot of people were thinking someone like Casey Kane or Kurt Busch or Matt Kenseth or Danica Patrick could possibly bring sponsorship to that car, because I think Furniture Row Racing wanted to run that car, but sponsorship was an issue. So now owner Barney Visser has come out this week and said that currently they do not plan to run that car. They do say that they hope to run a second car in the future at some point, but that will presumably not be next season. And if we're going to analyze that news any further, that's just one less good car, good team for one of these veterans to go to. And while I don't want to be overly dramatic about it, I would honestly say this might be the nail in the coffin in terms of Danica Patrick or Matt Kenseth's future Cup Series career. I think this announcement pretty much all but guarantees that one of those two drivers will definitely be retiring at the end of this season, or will, at the very least, not be running in the Cup Series anymore. There's also been rumors poking around that RCR has an open seat and it might go to a guy like Brennan Poole, who's been in the Xfinity Series for many years. So all signs seem to be pointing towards this could be the end of the road for Danica or for Matt Kenseth. There's just not that many good cars available, guys. Stewart Haas Racing has not yet announced who's going to be in the 10 or who's going to be in the 41. A lot of people seem to think Kurt Busch will end up still in the 41, but that 10 is still out in the open. Matt Kenseth specifically said that he was not a candidate for that car, so we can write that one off. Obviously, Danica Patrick's not going to be in the 10 car. And now that the 77 is closing its doors, there's really no more good rides left for those two. And we've heard Danica say the situation would have to be good for her to continue in the Cup Series, and she kind of said that she wants to be able to still be on a competitive team, and right now, there's none of those cars available. And while Matt Kenseth has not explicitly said that he wants to drive for only competitive teams, I think we can infer that he's probably not going to want to drive for a team like Front Row Motorsports. I've said this before, but I compare it to like last year. Greg Biffle kind of quietly retired after Roush Fenway announced that they were not going to be running the 16 anymore. They're going to be shrinking to a two-car team. Biffle was out of a ride, and Biffle, who's been a chase contender for almost his entire career in years past, won a lot of races, was basically the only opportunities he was getting were from smaller, kind of not as successful teams. And Biffle ultimately decided to not go that route, and he just retired. And I tend to think that Matt Kenseth and Danica Patrick have both kind of implied that they're in a similar situation. If they're not able to drive for a playoff contending team, I don't think they're going to drive at all next year. So That's, I guess maybe potentially the biggest fallout from this Furniture Row Racing news. So that's fun. So anyway, let's move on to talking about the playoff picture, looking ahead to Talladega next weekend. You know, we've got the biggest track in NASCAR looming pretty heavily above a lot of big name contenders' heads right now. So I'll go and flash right there. There are your point standings after Charlotte. Obviously, Truex has locked himself in. Kyle Larson, the 10th place finish wasn't great, but he's still got a pretty decent cushion because of all of his bonus points. Kevin Harvick, Chase Elliott both had really strong finishes, both did well in the stages, so they're up there pretty high. But I'd say after that, and I think you even still have to include them because Talladega, this could completely shake up the entire playoff picture, but I think especially after that, we look at guys like Denny Hamlin, Kyle Busch, Jimmy Johnson. I think we start to get to some real bubble drivers. Kyle Busch, we documented the issues he had on Sunday. He has a lot of bonus points. That's why he's still got a 12-point cushion, but that's not a big cushion when we're looking at such a wild card that Talladega is, and then of course we have Kansas afterwards, a track that Kyle Busch has struggled at for a lot of his career. I think it's also interesting, you look at Jimmy Johnson, there are only 8 points to the good. I'm sure they were hoping for a slightly better result at Charlotte, a track they've been historically great at, but obviously we still have Talladega, which is a fast track, and Kansas, a mile and a half, and Jimmy Johnson, Chad Knaus, they've been so good at big fast tracks in their history. I picked Johnson obviously to be out this round, but he's still going to be able to make some noise, I think. And then 8th, 9th, and 10th right there, it gets really tight. McMurray holds that spot right now because of his impressive 5th place run at Charlotte. Matt Kenseth, even though he had no bonus points coming in and he finished 11th, he did very well in the 2 stages, so he's right there on the back of McMurray. And then Brad Keselowski, who just had an uncharacteristically subpar day at Charlotte, is a couple points further back. And you look at that list, I picked both Matt Kenseth and Brad Keselowski to move on. Currently McMurray is spoiling that, but McMurray's going to have to prove that that 5th place run at Charlotte wasn't a fluke. We have Talladega coming up. McMurray's been a pretty good plate racer in his career. He's a very aggressive plate racer, so that could work to his disadvantage this weekend. But on the plus side for McMurray, Kansas is a mile and a half, similar in some ways to Charlotte, so the fact that they ran well there means they could potentially run well at Kansas. And remember, they're teammates with Kyle Larson, who's one of the playoff championship favorites, so clearly they've got some good information going back and forth. McMurray could be a big spoiler. I thought McMurray was going to be out in the round of 16. He's made it through that barely, and now he's hanging on to that final transfer spot into the round of 8. So McMurray could be the big spoiler if he can have a good weekend at Talladega this weekend. As for Matt Kenseth and Brad Keselowski, they both won at Talladega before, and in fact Brad Keselowski in 2014 came into this race at Talladega in a must-win scenario, and he got it. So if anyone's going to talk about being clutch at Talladega, Brad Keselowski's definitely the guy to look for. But like I said, Penske just has not looked good, and it's hard to tell if it's just the handling of their cars, but part of me thinks it's probably more the speed of their cars, and Talladega is a big speed place. Now, obviously the draft can help you out there, but the draft also helps everybody else out there, so I tend to think that Keselowski's not going to have a big advantage at Talladega, so he's going to have to work his way up the old-fashioned way. He's going to have friends, he's going to have to be able to make good moves, get some lucky breaks probably, like anyone has to have at Talladega. It's going to be risky. And the same goes for Matt Kenseth. He's had good performances at Talladega as well, but like anyone, wrecks can happen, and this whole playoff grid right here could be flipped completely upside down. Brian Blaney had a solid top 10 run at Charlotte, but he is still 11th in points because he didn't get very many stage points, and he doesn't have very many bonus points coming in. So he's going to definitely need to have a solid day at Talladega or Kansas. He's only 5 points out there. That's the thing. These 4 guys that are out, and the couple of the last guys that are in right there, not that many points are separating them. So, I mean, in a lot of cases for these guys, I think Talladega is just a survival day. I mean, if you can go into Talladega and finish top 5, top 10, that's great. But if you can just go into Talladega, finish top 15, maybe a couple other playoff contenders get knocked down in wrecks, it could still be a pretty good day. Talladega is obviously a wild card. More times than not, you're going to get wrecked out by a wreck that wasn't even your fault and you had no chance of avoiding, and it's just going to be that way. It's going to suck, but there are some things I guess you can do to try and avoid those scenarios. We've seen the Joe Gibbs cars run in the back, run together as strategic ways to try and avoid that type of stuff. And one thing I will credit NASCAR a lot for doing this year is Talladega used to be the final race of this round, so that everyone was at the last minute was trying to get in or get out. It was pandemonium. I like that they bumped it up a race, so even if you wreck at Talladega, you still feel like you have a chance to go out and win Kansas or do really well at Kansas. So I like that it's now in the middle of this round. I'm glad it's not the very last race, because that was kind of crazy. And I think it's important for teams to remember that. You don't have to win Talladega. It'd just be really nice if you could survive Talladega and either have a good points cushion or extend your cushion, I guess, going into Kansas. Because in my opinion, it's a lot easier to race somebody at Kansas if you're ahead of them in points rather than if you're behind them in points and you're trying to get back into the top 8. That is a lot harder task than just trying to hold these people off. The last playoff driver I'm going to obviously talk about is Ricky Stenhouse Jr. He didn't have a great run at Charlotte. He had an okay run, especially by Roush Fenway standards these days, but He's now last in points. He's not completely out of it. He's still not that far behind the cushion, but he's going to need a great day at Talladega because I don't expect a whole lot from this team at Kansas. Now, the main reason Ricky Stenhouse Jr. deserves a pretty decent amount of talking about here is he has won 2 of the last 3 restrictor plate races this season, including the race here at Talladega in May. Roush Fenway Racing has been known in the past for having really good restrictor plate programs, really good restrictor plate cars. Ricky Stenhouse seems to be a pretty decent restrictor plate driver, especially when given the right equipment. So could he come through in the clutch again and get a win and move on to round of 8? I said McMurray would be a spoiler. Stenhouse would be an even bigger spoiler if he gets up into the round of 8. Anything is possible. Talladega is going to be really interesting, like it always is. I mean, the only guy safe is Martin Truex Jr. Everybody else, even Larson, who's 29 points to the good, is going to have a little bit to worry about. A wreck at Talladega could put you right there on the cut line heading into Kansas, and nobody wants to be in that position. It's going to be exciting. If you want my pick for Talladega, the track that's really harder to pick winners at than anywhere else, I'm going to go ahead and go with Jamie McMurray. I know I picked him out to be out in the round of 16, but he proved me wrong there, and now he's running really well in the round of 12. He's an aggressive driver at these plate tracks. It seems like we always see him near the front, and yeah, sometimes he's messing people up and getting caught up in wrecks or starting wrecks, but I think he's a skilled enough driver. I think Talladega is more forgiving, I think, of a racetrack than Daytona. Daytona's a pretty narrow track. 3-wide Daytona is kind of hard to work, but Talladega, you can run 3-4-wide, and it's not that big a deal. I think McMurray is going to ride this wave of momentum. He's had a great car at Charlotte. I think they're going to have speed at Talladega. I think he's going to ride this wave of momentum. He's won at plate tracks before. I think McMurray is going to spoil a lot of people's brackets. I think it'd be great if it happened, actually. I'm almost rooting for him. But anyway, yeah, let me know who you guys think is going to take home the win at Talladega. Who do you think is in trouble in terms of the point picture? Let me know. But anyway, yeah, that is my show. That is this week's episode of Out of the Groove. Thank you guys so much for watching. You check out all of my social media and other links in the description down below. If you have any friends or family or people you know that are big into racing and NASCAR fans, maybe recommend the show to them. It always is great to see new viewers, new comments down below from people that are new to the show. That's really fun for me to see. So I hope this weekend's race is good. I hope it's exciting. I think it'll be fun. It's Talladega. It's always pretty fun for race fans. But anyway, yeah, W Cup Series Season 8, race number 9 will be out very, very soon. So keep your eyes peeled for that to hit your subscription boxes in the next few days. But other than that, I think I've said everything I need to say. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I'll see you again next Thursday, I suppose. Have a good one.